Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'll start off by saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone from wherever you are joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio. I'm the coordinator of CIFAL York operations, and I would like to officially open the fourth and final session of our Rapid Damage Assessment Speaker Series with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Takaranto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event, our participants may be joining from various locations, so I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speaker, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to the webinar. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Mesha Richard. Mesha Richard is the current Education Director for the Ontario Association of Emergency Managers. She is the Emergency Preparedness Lead for the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Center in Thunder Bay. In this role, she acts as a subject matter expert assisting with the development and maintenance of emergency management governance, training materials, and exercises. Mesha holds a Master of Disaster and Emergency Management degree from York University, as well as a Master's Certificate for the Assessment and Management of Volcanic Risk from the University of Geneva, and bachelor's degrees from Western University and Brandon University in the focus areas of political science and disaster studies. Mesha, thank you for moderating today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. I feel very privileged to be a part of the session this morning. I have the delight in being able to introduce our guest speaker today, Charles Huyck. So Charles is a founding partner of ImageCat and has been instrumental in developing operational strategies for spatial technologies. He directs a team of engineers, scientists, and programmers developing software tools and data processing algorithms for loss estimation and risk assessment. He has over 20 years of GIS analysis and application development experience, integrating advanced geospatial technologies into disaster simulation tools and CAT modeling programs. He's known for results-oriented and novel solutions to complex spatial modeling problems, including extracting damage estimates and building inventories from satellite imagery, migration of CAT models to online environment, and integration of transportation and lifelines vulnerability into GIS network analysis. So now I get to turn it over to you, Charles.
Hi, thank you, Mesha. All right. Thank you for that introduction. Yeah, get this.
Actually, while you're pulling up your screen, this gives me one moment to just make a quick reminder to everybody in attendance that as much as we have potentially 200 registrants for this, I will do my best to moderate our Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions into the chat. And it's my understanding that Charles will pause periodically so that we can address your questions as well as at the end of the session.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Mesha. I'll try to pause throughout. This presentation does go all over the place, I guess, was the feedback that that my wife gave me when I talked to her about it yesterday. So I'll try to pause periodically to give you guys a chance to answer some questions. A little bit about myself and the company. ImageCat was founded in 2000 on the basis of integrating remote sensing data into the fields of CAT modeling and loss estimation. I myself started as a GIS guy after the Northridge earthquake in Los Angeles in 1994, then went on to doing loss modeling, and it came to the attention of my founding partner and I that there was a lot of capabilities that were going to be coming down the pike with high resolution remote sensing data to find damaged structures and to create building inventories that the industry really wasn't well suited to take up. So ImageCat was founded on that notion. Was a bit ahead of our time, but we have been able to do a lot of work for governments, NGOs, insurance industry, and research organizations. So we kind of pride ourselves in bringing ideas, from ideas to research and then application within various sectors. And in that capacity, we often team with, are part of projects with very large teams where we partner with academic institutions, particularly on research grants. So here's some of the clients that we've had in the last 20 years that maybe that some of you would recognize. And as part of that, we've also responded to many actual disasters. And this can be in a research capacity, this can be for insurance, hedge funds, this can be for FEMA or the World Bank. And, you know, I'm not going to be talking about the crunching of pixels today. I'm not really going to go into that level of detail for this audience, but what I'll be doing is kind of giving an overview of the types of technologies that are available, an overview of the emergency management landscape, which I think is appropriate for this this group. The research case, kind of how that dovetails into a CAT modeling framework, and then I'll be talking about three main methods, I think, of determining damage after an event: a loss estimation, damage detection, and crowdsourcing. Then I'll talk about some novel things coming down the pike and some ethical considerations. And I think that probably what I'll do is pause after every one of these bullets or so for questions, and then maybe we can have some more discussion at the end. So that does cover a lot of breadth. So just to give you some direction here, what I hope that you'll walk away with is that these are powerful tools that can be used to assess damage after an event, and there are compelling reasons to do so. But the algorithms and models within these tools sets have bias, which is important to understand and acknowledge. But the bias can be minimized through basic data fusion. You can sort of triangulate in on the truth there, but you have to really carefully consider the sources of all of this information and understand where it comes from and what the limitations are, so that you don't overstate your hand when you're making decisions based on these processes. So one reviewer on a recent proposal that I gave to a research organization that I won't name here didn't see the light, and the feedback they came back with was, why not just turn on CNN? But those of you who've tried to do that and actually use this for actionable information have probably realized that the media just tends to go for the most eye-catching damage, the most visually impressive damage, and that they'll all typically repeat the same sources of information. They have no vested interest in capturing the spatial extent of damage, getting any sort of estimates right. That's not really what their viewership is interested in. And you really do need to get that sort of information down in order to make strategic decisions. So this is a couple screen captures from yesterday, trying to figure out what happened after the 6.4 earthquake in Eureka. We're currently doing some work for Southern California Edison, and this seemed relevant. And the estimates came between 2,000 and 7,000 people that are without power, which I think really illustrates the uncertainty of the information that you get after an event. If you're trying to make decisions, this was in Canada, for example, and it was cold at night. The difference between these two numbers would be quite substantial. So you really have to try to figure out what's going on as quickly as possible for an emergency management perspective. What's needed and who needs what where is the question. Where are the injuries and casualties? Where people need medical supplies? Where are there fires that might have broken out, or where might fires broken out? Where are there power outages, transportation blockages that might impede the ability to get goods to people who need them? Where should there be temporary shelters? Where should we set them up? Where are the communities, the socially vulnerable communities that are going to need that shelter? Debris removal is a big one. If you've got a lot of stuff in the way there, it's hard to respond. That can often take a lot of work, particularly after hurricanes. Where are the unsafe buildings? Where should people not be re-inhabiting their homes? All these are really matters of life and death here that people have to try to get a handle on after an event. And it's, you really don't know what's happening outside of your immediate purview right after the disaster stops. It's something like an earthquake. If you've got something like floods and wind, hurricanes that are more gradual, you can do some prediction beforehand. But even then, the models are fallible. So there's a strong case to be made for getting out there and figuring out what has happened as soon as possible. Disaster declarations is another big one that has to be decided on. Do you need to get federal involvement? For example, Eureka, the event, I don't think they did have a disaster declaration. I'm sure they reviewed early damage assessments to be able to make that decision. What resources need to be mobilized? And when you're looking at international events, what international resources can be mobilized, which can be a tricky decision, particularly given that some countries won't necessarily be forthcoming on what damage there was or was not. So strong case to be made. Aside from that, there's a lot of just situational awareness that can come from damage detection and just mapping in general. So here's a map that was produced by NOAA after September 11th, and it's got where the buildings were and where the buildings are now. You can look at this, and after you've been tasked with doing something with a crew, for example, trying to get some of the steel out of the way, you'd be able to see where you can go, where you can't go, where you can go for basic services and so forth without having to. You can see this would basically shortcut thousands of conversations, being able to have this map and being able to pass this around so that everybody has a common operating procedure, essentially, that they can work off from this type of data. And that's often referred to as situational awareness. Terrain, hazardous regions, density, and just basic. People come from all over, and they're not going to have any idea of what the landscape is in a particular locality. And then the potential for cascading effects is another really big one. Are secondary impacts likely? What can we do to prevent them? Trying to minimize the amount of unknowns. But the second case to be made, or the other industry to be made, is really integrating damage assessments into the research community. And there's a real feedback cycle here, because the research that's done based on damage assessments does feedback into loss estimation programs, which then are fed back to emergency managers and future events. It's very important to try to get these things down. So that's the damage, the vulnerability, and also the restoration of buildings, systems, and people. They basically, these types of curves look like this. You've got some sort of excitation, such as flood depth and what you would expect the percent damage to be given a building type. In this case, I think it's a single family versus multifamily, 1-story and 2-story. But often it's very detailed structural classifications or when a building was built. I think, in general, as a community, we've done quite a bit to nail down those sorts of problems. But what we haven't done as well is figure out what the impacts to different groups of people are, what communities take longer to restore, how economies recover, how businesses recover, how, and indeed how lifeline systems recover. And the bottom example here is, days after earthquake, how many pipes are restored, and a lot of uncertainty in that type of data. But being able to understand those situations and what constrains those, particularly social factors, is a very important ingredient in loss estimation tools that, again, inform not only response but mitigation. So what buildings need to be hardened, what communities need more attention, awareness, and so on and so forth. So all of this is based on having good data after an event and having funding to go out there and track this information so that it can be integrated into the decision-making process. And then, I guess my last bullet here is this is relevant both now and in the future. So as we look forward with climate change, being able to take these type of models and say these are associated with floods, I guess, as it is, being able to anticipate future precipitation and droughts and how that change in the natural process is going to impact hazards moving forward and mitigate or adapt accordingly is a big opportunity. Okay, and this is one of the head scientists at a leading CAT modeling company, RMS. Catastrophe models, in contrast to highly predictive auto claims models, have a relatively small number of historical data points. This means that CAT modeling methods and data must continue to advance. There's just a lot more uncertainty there because of you have just much fewer events. Sometimes shifts in our understanding of the risks happen as a result. This may continue in the future. I think this was essentially an apology for a huge shift in the results that were coming out of some of their models, but it really illustrates the importance of trying to learn from each of these events as they come down the pipe. So now I'm going to go through what I think are the major methods of rapid disaster damage assessment tools. Again, I'll be talking about loss estimation, CAT modeling. I'll talk about damage detection from a remote sensing perspective, crowdsourced or manual observations that can be done with optical data. I won't be talking about cell phone and social media data. Maybe that's something that's the students can take up. I think it's a very exciting area. It is not my specialty or something that I can really speak to. So loss estimation and CAT modeling. Here's the example again from yesterday that happened in Eureka, California. It's the type of information that you can get out of a loss model, and you can see immediately how it would be useful. It's the estimated. This has the estimated fatalities that you would expect from the event. So the 65% chance that it's a less than 1, 30% chance it was 1 to 10, for example. I think the last I heard it was something like 2. So you can see this. This is very useful when you're trying to figure out. When the state of California, for example, is trying to figure out whether Eureka is going to be overwhelmed, which is a serious consideration. And then it has an estimate of the economic losses. This is often what I think determines whether there's going to be a federal declaration, but also gives you a spatial distribution of the ground motion and the exposure, which you can see in the background, and the populations of each of the cities and how much ground motion that you could expect in here. This is a very actionable information for them to decide, whether there's perhaps there's a pocket of a settlement up here in the mountains or something that would need to have a special attention. These type of results are invaluable for that purpose. Fast, these can run in less than a minute, essentially. A good basis for large scale decisions, a formal way of integrating knowledge into the state of the art. So if you have people all over the world working on damage functions in one way or another, for one component or another, they can be integrated into these kind of common frameworks to have an established way of giving answers back to people trying to make decisions. And they're usually way better than nothing, right? So if you did not have this, then you would have to be making that decision blind, and been involved in a lot of emergency management projects where they have to try to make that decision, and it's much better to have the information than it isn't. That said, sometimes these models can be way off. So the drawbacks for single events, you may have a significant amount of bias that's stacked in there, and that's usually based on the accuracy of the hazard assessment. You just do not know what the soil type is, or you don't have sensors in the area, for example. You can't figure out how much the ground shook there. The applicability of the vulnerability functions. So all of this estimated fatalities and estimated economic losses come from an assessment of what we think the buildings are in California. We've got a very good idea of what the buildings are in California, but as you move to other areas in the world, developing nations, for example, it's going to vary a lot spatially, and you may or may not have that in your underlying data sets. And that's yeah, and that gets to the quality of the exposure data where you're making those assessments of. The vulnerability functions themselves, that is how buildings behave given ground motion or flooding. There's a lot of uncertainty there. People often talk about the depth damage curves from flooding, whereas it might be duration or velocity that has a bigger impact on certain types of buildings. A lot of this stuff we just don't have a great handle on. We need to go out there and inventory the buildings afterwards to figure out what's going on. So one area that you can improve your results is really by getting better exposure data. This is something where we sort of specialize at ImageCat. Here's some work that we did for with the British Geological Survey, GEM, and others for the government of Nepal on a grant from the UK Space Agency. So this is data that we put together in some part from space. And this is based on, I can't remember what the unit is, but sub-settlement unit in Nepal of what you expect the percentage of buildings to be by a building type, adobe, wood frame, reinforced concrete, and so on and so forth. And for each of these types, it's based on a combination of data taken from satellite and observations made from the ground, census data, all sort of put together into this type of package. And you can see each of these types of buildings will have different makeups and will map to different vulnerabilities. Here you've got a pocket of adobe up in the mountains by Tibet, for example, where they'd be vulnerable to landslides. Being aware of that, having that information available to the government of Nepal is really critical for them to being able to make decisions about where buildings need to be retrofitted or replaced, or maybe stage resources and what have you. Yeah, and the process that we use increase the accuracy of exposure data. As I said, it's a combination of going out in the field and making observations about what you expect in a given development pattern. So what single family areas look like, you take a look at those, what the downtown business cores look like, what the rural areas look like, and you're able to detect those different types of areas with remote sensing data and the density of those buildings with remote sensing data, and then you combine it with this to get to essentially the final answer. This is an area of really active research, but this is also, I have to say, subject to bias. Something you have to think about when you're doing all of this type of research. How much can you actually see from the outside of a building? Sometimes you don't know whether it's a concrete or steel frame building, for example, and where you're able to get to can often bias the results there. Okay, so maybe this is a good time for a break, Mesha.
Certainly. I feel like you might want a sip of your tea and I'll quickly check and see. I know there was one question that was put in the chat and I was just about to actually ask for a little bit more clarification, perhaps. Maybe there's enough information for you to answer. If not, I can ask for a little bit more detail. But the question coming from the audience was how to start with a high literacy community step by step without having any conflicts.
To what end?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask for a little bit more detail. So perhaps I can circle back to that question if the submitter is able to just type a little bit more context in there. I did kind of have a question before you get too far that related to the quote that you gave. So I feel like this is just maybe a good opportunity to discuss without detracting.
Robert Muir-Woods?
Yeah. Oh, you don't even have to go back. Don't worry about that,
Okay.
Charles. But kind of how you said it's almost a little bit of an apology is almost maybe a little bit more of a comment around communicating when there's been large changes in predictions, potentially due to shifting or improved data sets, and how you address those large gaps in what was potentially projected first versus what comes later. So I feel like emergency managers deal with that a lot, as this is the prediction, or what was suggested, or the variables versus what your end results are, and how to get around some of those tricky conversations.
Well, there's a lot of shooting the messenger, isn't there? Yeah, I mean, I think this particular example was likely based on the integration of better estimates of wind speed into RMS 11, which, their customers who would run this model would then figure out, oh, good, we have, millions and millions more dollars in potential losses than we anticipated. That means we all have to go to the bank to make sure that we've got enough money to cover those losses if they happen as a 200-year event. Unfortunately, as they got better, as you get information, it's not always good news, right? To me, I think that's why a priori, it's very important to be transparent about the uncertainty and the losses that you generate. And I've already gone through uncertainty in the losses for a specific event. If you're running probabilistic events, it's the same thing, uncertainty in the hazard data, the exposure data, and the vulnerability. And as you make changes, those will change. Being able to say things like this is probably right within a factor of 4, I think is important to people don't like to hear it, but then again, afterwards, they'll be complaining as you get better data. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, I guess. Did you get to any more clarity on the other question?
Not at this point in time, so perhaps you can circle back after to that, but thank you for kind of addressing my brief comment there.
Yep. Okay, so I wasn't sure exactly what the audience would be. I think they're probably less interested in this sort of damage detection type of analysis, going through and putting together the material for this. I found this graphic I put together 20 years ago, which just illustrates how old this technology and way of thinking is. If you've got satellite images before and after an event, you can see the damage that is in there, but it takes a lot to catalog that damage. And one way to actually come to a conclusion as to what has probably happened is to do band math or run algorithms, basically comparing the before and after damage. And there's all sorts of methods to do this. Simple subtraction actually will work, but then you need to basically do a lot of smoothing and aggregating up of those differences to figure out where they're significant and where they're not. The analysis is fairly fast on when you're running it on an image by image basis, but with cloud computing and better registration and better satellite acquisition, since I put this together, it's really feasible now to get these type of answers within this kind of the 72-hour window that you really need them to be able to make critical decisions for emergency management. And one of the benefits is it's seen as completely objective. So if you've got triggers, either for NGOs looking at anticipatory action, or if you've got insurance parametric triggers, if you can get them right, you can base those decisions based on that image. And that means that people don't get to argue about it if you have those algorithms in the can. But the drawbacks is not all changes damage. You have a lot of seasonal changes. You've got growth. You've got emergency response vehicles in the middle of cities, all sorts of things. Not all damage can be seen from the sky. It doesn't do a great job of medium and slight damage. Historically, what I've seen is they don't tend to be well validated. You can show that it works for one event, but to be able to really correlate that with damage on site, you don't see a whole lot of longitudinal studies on that. Hopefully that will change. Let's see, tends to underestimate the damage, again, because not getting that moderate or light damage in there. Hazards can come and go very quickly. If you don't image the flood at its peak flood, then you won't have the extent of the water, for example. And what I've seen more frequently now is that people are using machine learning and AI, in which those tools don't transfer from one event or one biome to another very well. So I think there's an overestimation of people getting into the area that don't necessarily understand from a loss estimation standpoint exactly what they're looking at. They get good results, and then the next ones it doesn't necessarily do so well. And lastly, pixels don't talk, right? If you run this analysis and see that there's change and that you can try to correlate that with damage, it doesn't tell you why there was damage there. And I think there's a lot of benefit to diving down into that and getting a more detail. See, I think I'm going kind of slow here, so I'm not going to go through exactly what can be imaged through for each hazard, but just real quickly, burn, scarp areas, inundation from floods. Doesn't work that great in highly urban areas. Wind speed, you can get the scattering of debris is very visible, and from that you can often estimate the wind speed and try to refine your models. Tsunami and surge tend to be more extreme. You can see that damage. Earthquake, again, looks like only the catastrophic damage, and even then it tends to underestimate it. Here's some examples of the tsunami in Japan, where we did some analysis for them, looking at the extent of the rack line, and they are sort of the gold standards of using this type of analysis after an event, and have responded to many events in the last I don't know what it is, 15 years or so. Infrared data can be very compelling for looking at flooding. Here's an example where the water sat in New Orleans, so you're pretty sure you've got it. And just by mapping the invisible data in the infrared to the red band, you can see the extent of the flooding. Here's another example from tornadoes. I think this is Moore, Oklahoma. Yeah, very, very extreme. When you've got very extreme damage, you can just overlay these things and subtract it, and you're going to get a response that's quite visible. Another thing to do is edge detection and look at regional edge detection. You're going to have a lot more edges and chaos according to the scatter. And in this case, machine learning does quite well in identifying where those damages are. But again, pixels don't talk. A lot of times where you're looking at things like surge, you want to understand not only that there was damage, but why. So being able to understand what happened from a physical perspective to that structure can be very useful, either to understand the hazard in the future or the mechanisms of damage, and that's where a manual interpretation can do a much better job. Which gets me to the next sort of bullet of methods of detection: crowdsourced damage detection. So this is where you have many people looking at the images, saying what they see, and that can be used. You can basically triage that out to universities, institutions. You can be very selective, people, engineering departments and so forth. I find it's a very good way to integrate engineering knowledge and image interpretation. So you have, people coming together, explaining the imaging, what you can see, Sometimes it's difficult to interpret, particularly if you've got SAR data or infrared data, talking with engineers about how buildings are damaged. And that out of that, you get these protocols that are adaptive as people start to interpret them and come in and see new things. You can modify that. Every event is different in terms of how things are going and what it looks like, given the biomes. Being able to have actual intelligence into the process is a big benefit. And it increases awareness of both the impact and the tools themselves. So the people who are actually involved in the process learn a lot, as well as the end user of the product. Drawbacks depends on the availability of the crowd. You know, you're not going to get a whole lot of people excited about doing this for Eureka, for example. As well as actual intelligence, you've got actual ineptitude. If you don't have people that are very good at this, you can get some bad results in there, and you have to have active ways of basically validating the results, and that can be have significant overhead. Still can't see everything, still underestimate the damage, and you still have bias. What I see is even when you can see the bias, what tends to come back is that, just from a human psychology perspective, people underestimate the damage in the high areas because it's sort of emotionally overwhelming, and then they overestimate damage in the low damage areas because, you know, they're sort of more looking for it, trying to help those folks. So you have to sort of take some of these things into account. So we've implemented this a couple very large scale events. One was a GeoCan response to Haiti, where I think we got like 15,000 responses in 10 days or something, funded by the World Bank. And this was used essentially for their damage assessments, these types of maps, people going out in the field, and a joint report that came out figured out what the post-disaster needs assessment was. People who did do some validation based on ground truth data that actually I had the pleasure of collecting myself, did come to that same conclusion, that there's really underestimation of damage. But in some of these areas, you're not going to get in there, and there's no other way to inventory the damage. So really an example of it being better than nothing, but we have to do a better job of being able to figure out what an uplift factor might be when we're inventorying the damage. We also did this in response to a Hurricane Sandy under their banner. It's a project that was funded by them, used to expedite IA rental assistance. So this was quite exciting. This was you know, a couple of weeks we had 150,000-ish interpretations that went to FEMA, and they used this to expedite rental assistance. So these people that were, you know, removed from their homes without having an engineer look at the building got checks. This was huge for President Obama at the time, in comparison with President Bush in New Orleans, and it was a big win for them in terms of how that response went. So it can be used in, I don't know if it's life-saving capacity in this instance, but it can be used definitely very effectively to focus aid. Then we have, you know, essentially software that allows you to see kind of before and after data and make those determinations on a site-by-site basis. And then this all this data was put into a map application available from the New York Times, and that allowed for the dissemination of that data for decision-making purposes. Okay, another break maybe?
Certainly. So I have attempted, we had two questions. There was a little bit more detail that came through. I'm not positive if I've been able to answer it the way that perhaps they would like. And so we'll see if you have a bit more context. But we ended up having two questions that came through, essentially talking about historic kind of heritage areas, not fully understanding the importance of perhaps protecting these areas and community understanding of kind of the value and perhaps the risks. So trying to understand how to have a conversation to improve their knowledge and improve preservation of these spaces. So I'll comment a little bit of my response, and then perhaps you have a little bit more that you could add if you have any experience that's related to more like the historical and areas of historical and cultural relevance. It's essentially that I don't think there's any one best way to communicate, and certainly trying to determine what the audience is for the message is important. So whether you're speaking to government or you're speaking to a research group or speaking to some sort of community organization, certainly having the modeling that you're talking about, these different visual aspects of the data sets can help perhaps get some action and greater knowledge and understanding, or determine how to improve the questions so that you can improve the data. So it seems like it's a little bit nebulous right now based on a couple of the questions that were similar in my answer. So I don't know if you have any experience as related to these kind of particular sites.
Well, you know, I think it gets down to the question of what is value. You know, what we're trying to characterize in a lot of these loss estimation programs is 99% of the building stock in order to try to get a handle on what might happen. But it's that 1% or 0.1% of buildings that have you know, historical significance that often miss that. You know, we often do have things like point assessments that you know, governments infill, and they will put in their buildings and sometimes they put on hospitals, schools, and fire stations. But culturally significant areas, you know, often miss. And what we've seen in previous events, like BAM comes to mind, right? This ancient fortress in Iran that was just decimated by earthquake there, and we saw it. And I think that when you talk about protecting those assets, you're talking about investing a lot of mitigation funding. And site-specific engineering analysis. And I guess I'm trying to say is it's sort of outside the context. It's important, but it's outside the context of this discussion because by nature, those areas are irregular and need site-specific analysis. But the other thing is what is value, right? So if you've got, say you have a $100 million facility that's church, let's call it a church, in a country that is significant to people. Can you really put a price tag on that and send it through a loss estimation tool, you know, and make your decisions based on that? Probably not. These things need to be sort of considered outside of the context of regular loss estimation. And that's one of the points that I make actually in the ethics discussion, which I think we're not going to have time to get to, but I'll try to do my best.
Okay, so keeping track of our time limitations as we go along. If you'd like, there's kind of one more question that I can throw at you, or we can keep some of the questions until the end and see how much time we have as we go through the rest of your presentation.
All right, let's see what it is.
Okay. So if it's known that damage estimates often underestimate, is that factored into models using the data? So for example, they said adding a corrective percentage or amount to account for it. So I think you might have kind of touched on this before, but if you had anything to add on that.
I think that's an opportunity for research, in my opinion. I haven't seen that myself. Quantifying that and having that consistent throughout different areas, I think is part of the challenge. And one of the reasons why you have to get out there and collect this data. So I see an opportunity to basically merge these types of systems, damage detection systems, into a consistent framework where you're able to increase the accuracy of your estimates as you go along. So this is a little bit of a confusing graphic given how much time we have, but if you have real-time feeds and a loss estimation system, and you use that to come up with regional assessments based on the data that you have in an area, and how confident you are in, say, the vulnerability functions and so forth in an area. For example, I mentioned we're confident in California. You do a confidence assessment and then send people to do stratified sampling with crowdsourced data, and that can be based on acquisition. Merge that with some of the data that you've got from Earth observation, to come up with modified damage, which you would then put into some spatially focused parameters to revise that process and come up with another estimate. So I guess that's the answer to the question, being able to have a system where you iteratively, a formalized system. I mean, people do this already, but a formalized system where you are able to, from a statistical standpoint, update this data in an intelligent way, not just an ad hoc way, I think would benefit. There's not been a lot of research in that area. But one area that we were able to apply the same sort of theory was in the Nepal earthquake of 2015. Not a lot of ground motion data. You can see these big circles basically represent that uncertainty. We took observations of building damage divided by the number of buildings that were in an area to basically back calculate with damage functions what we thought the peak ground acceleration was in specific areas, and then use that to interpolate a new ground motion map for Kathmandu. So here's our interpolated PGA opposed to what they had there. This was actually updated one. It used to have a big circle there. So this was had a little bit of corrective measures from the USGS. But so if you take that type of approach and then measure your fatalities and damage based on that, then you can have a better system. I think this needs to be formalized by the community, methods such as this. So this is data that we did for UNICEF, where they were reaching out to the orphan kids. So, really very important data that's being potentially disseminated for decision making. Recovery, something is that we really don't understand is recovery, and this is going to be much more important looking at climate change, trying to get into how long does it take our communities to recover. Drones and geo video is an area that's very exciting. Can also be crowdsourced now, the acquisition of this data. Governments have a lot of restrictions against the acquisition of drone data, which is problematic, but also there's privacy concerns. This is a photo I inadvertently took of a woman. I don't think she's too happy about it. You have to figure out how to do this in a way that to acquire the data that in a way that doesn't impinge on people's privacy. And the other is last opportunity is really for compassion and understanding. As you're collecting this data and doing these damage assessments, you have an opportunity to go out here in the field. These are images all from Haiti, though I've gone out to other events. This one was one that really stuck with me. This woman's from Canada, I think. The military just shows how getting out there and meeting the people that are affected by these events can have tremendous effect. This is a church where people are where the pastor sang mass here after the damage happened. Having the opportunity to understand exactly how it how it impacts people, I think is really important to cementing people's dedication in this area. Something that's not often acknowledged. We're just thinking we're getting out there improving damage function, but there's more to it than that. And I don't think I'm gonna have time for the ethical considerations here. Unless nobody has any other questions, I can dive into that.
Yeah, Charles, there aren't any more questions that are in the chat at this time. So you want to take an extra minute or two and see how far you can get in the ethical considerations. Sure.
This is another presentation that I gave for the World Bank. Actually, they asked me to present on some of this stuff. There are things to keep in mind for damage assessment as well. One is minimizing bias. The problem is that inventoried assets are usually the ones that are most valuable to people who make a lot of money, right? You've got the downtown cores, you've got more affluent areas, more affluent cities are more likely to do a good job of inventorying their assets. Berkeley and Beverly Hills do a great job in California, for example. But if you stitch those together and try to estimate what the damage is going to be after an event, for example, if you don't have great inventories in an area, or you don't understand how certain types of buildings behave, and you run these through these models, you're going to bias it in favor of those that have money. So you always have to be cognizant of that. Deprivation housing. this is something that we've ran into internationally quite a few times. Some countries don't want to acknowledge that they have these areas, and if you do map them, in some areas there's concerns that they might be cleared. You know, you're creating an inventory for some for really some life-changing decisions. So figuring out you know, where you are, when you are, do have those kind of considerations, and make sure that that you don't produce data that's used to make decisions that well that are beyond the scope of your original intention, I think is important. I guess that's the way to put it. Also, aggregating data, I think, is important when you put it into the public domain. If you're sharing it with your research partners or government, sometimes that doesn't, you know, you need that site-specific data in order to make decisions. But, you know, there was an example, was collecting, in the US, they're collecting site-specific data, and the Portland NAACP sued over privacy concerns and won. And I think that the decision was correct, because they were, if those results were affecting residential housing values without any engineering review, and you really have to be cognizant of the cascading effects of this data when you put it out there. And lastly, I think this gets to the historical heritage question indirectly, and that is taking a step back and saying, what is it that you're talking about? So we were doing a lot of building inventories for Africa, and if you think, well, how much does it cost to build this hut? Well, it's kind of a ridiculous question, because that was built all with indigenous materials and all with local community labor. So the answer could conceivably be zero, right? So how do you put a number to that? And in effect, does it actually matter if what you're really trying to do is get to an indication of what the disruption will be after an event, in order to make you know, the decisions that we laid out in the beginning of this presentation? So how do you price that disruption, and how do you get this information for decision making in a way that's that helps people rather than just gives a dollar value? All of this technology started in the insurance industry, and I think we still suffer from that a little bit in our thinking about dollars, not people. But I think people are doing a better job of understanding things like social vulnerability and making decisions like to protect significant cultural heritage sites and what have you, and not just focus on the dollar amounts. But that's something that I think that you have to keep in mind when you're doing these projects, and try to drill down to what questions that you're trying to answer. And that's all I have.
That's excellent. So we still managed to keep everything on time. And in fact, I would say if there was one more question, but I don't see any new ones that have populated in the chat. So I guess that means you covered a lot and in enough detail that hopefully that addressed any queries as we went along. I do want to thank you very much for your time today, Charles. I really appreciate it. I know it's a lot to try and cover in a 1-hour session. And as you said, some of these elements have been their own separate presentations, obviously. So we appreciate your time and sharing all of this knowledge with us and the attendees today. I want to thank everybody that's attended, and as was noted at the very beginning, that this was the last of the Rapid Damage Assessment Speaker Series. So right in time for winter holidays for some folks. So we definitely appreciate everybody joining today. I did want to ask Charles if there's any information that you wanted to give as far as about yourself or about what you do for folks to be able to follow up with you afterwards. You can populate it in the chat, or you're welcome to vocalize it if you'd like.
Well, I've ImageCat. You can Google it. Check out our LinkedIn site. I don't have any additional promotional material. I guess I will say that as a company, some of the things that we're starting to pivot to and address are things like a secondary economic disruption impacts. So these are things like if you think about, well, New Orleans is a good example, right? If you had the primary flood of New Orleans and got a dollar figure there, you wouldn't really want to use that to characterize what happened in New Orleans, because what happened in New Orleans is everyone had to leave, right? You had a huge diaspora out of the area. The economy was down for basically recovered to a new normal, never really recovered. So we're trying to do more work in characterizing sort of how long things will be out of whack, whether you expect things to actually recover in a day, a week, a month, a year. So if that's of interest to anybody, I encourage you to reach out to me directly. I can share my email. Maybe that's one thing I can do.
Certainly. So while Charles is throwing that in the chat, I will also note that we do have the reminder that if any of the participants are interested or know somebody that you think might be interested, that CIFAL York does have ongoing events. So you can certainly, stay tuned, follow us on social media. There's Twitter and Instagram links that are in the chat right now. And that this session is also being recorded. So we did comment that will be uploaded to the YouTube channel and will be on the event page shortly. So you can certainly check out the video there and share it more widely. I don't know, Ali or Francesco, if you guys have anything that you would like to add as a last comment to the session.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to first echo your thanks. Thank you, Charles, for that great presentation. It was super informative and very interesting. Thank you, Mesha, for moderating and facilitating the discussion. And thank you to everyone in the audience for participating throughout the series and attending our sessions. Just a couple of last things to mention. This is the last session for the series. So sometime shortly after the session, we'll be sending out an email with an evaluation form for everyone who attended or who's registered, just to get some more feedback. And we will also be sending certificates of attendance to anyone who's participated in at least 2 of the 4 sessions. So for everyone in the audience, just keep an eye out for those emails. And thank you again to everybody.
Thanks for having me, you guys.
Yes,
Ali,
thank you, Charles, and thank you, Mesha, for everything you did for this session. Thank you. I appreciate it. Go ahead, Charles. Sorry.
Oh, I just said anything else you'd like to add?